dad he called it, we're orphans of Mexico and stepchildren of the United States. Right?
But the street knowledge, the lived experience that some of these professors have are go far beyond, because again, even when we say studied or went to school, a lot of the study and the knowledge that we did obtain at these schools is white and watered down history anyway.
Right. Little Chicano, Mexicano, Latino, Hispano, whatever we call ourselves. Yeah. We're the same people.
Exactly.
And telling them, if you don't know your history, you can't understand your present, and you can't envision your future.
One of the things that's most disappointing for me is when I see people of color, people that look like me, that speak like me, now turning their back on the new immigrants, on the new migrants, and us and coming. ¿Qué tal, amigos de Spanglish? Bienvenidos a otro capítulo. Hoy estamos con un invitado muy especial. Estamos con nada más y nada menos que Rudy Gonzalez, CEO and President of Servicios de la Raza. Also, one of 8 children of the late, great athlete, poet, civil rights leader, Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez. Rudy, such a pleasure to have you here today. How do you feel? How's your heart? ¿Cómo estás?
Mucho gusto. Mil gracias. What is it? Oh, yeah. Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes. And that's all the Spanish we're going to do.
Okay. Well, I mean, Spanish, I can fumble through it, but I'm not a native Spanish speaker. Okay. My parents did not teach us. Okay. None of the children did they teach Spanish. My eldest sister learned her Spanish, and she's probably the best Spanish speaker of all of us. Yeah. She is the eldest sister, but she was kind of partly raised by my mother's mother, my grandmother, who spoke Spanish, really, Maria Teresina Romero.
We wanted to ask you about that. Tell us about your past and your long history. Obviously, a lot of ties to Colorado and the Southwest, but where do your people originate from?
Well, and it's interesting because I'm a former educator and teacher, and my undergrad was English Lit and Writing, so I taught English, literacy, reading, language, grammar. But I also was a Chicano studies teacher, only because I lived it. Yeah, I lived what people teach nowadays in called Chicano studies or ethnic studies.
History books, yes.
And the history books, right? I mean, I grew up, and I like to say I'm a child of the movement and adult still engaged in La lucha. La lucha sigue. Exactly. And that, I was going to say that means the struggle continues. But, in growing up with this man who born into abject poverty in East Denver in the tough barrios, and was a natural athlete and self-taught boxing and boxer, and took up the sport at 16 and became Denver's first homegrown, as in born in Denver, national amateur champion in 1947 at the age of 19, with the record of 48-4, he turned pro.
Right. And about your dad specifically, Corky, because you just mentioned to me before we started, he had another nickname out in Mexico, but a friend referred to him by another nickname. But where does the nickname Corky originate from?
Corky, and it's stuck with him his entire life. My dad was the youngest of 4 brothers. But when my grandfather married, he married Gonzales Lucero in the Raton, Trinidad area, where he met her. And my grandmother, who I never knew, my dad didn't either. She died when he was 2.5 years old. And she was part of the Lucero land grant of over 10 million acres in southern Colorado, northern New Mexico. Wow. So we go back generations, right? Obviously. And she had 3 daughters and a son from her first marriage. She was married to a gringo, and so he took the kids too.
Yeah.
And then she gave him 4 more sons, my dad being the baby.
Right.
Right. And then she passed, and he never knew his mother. My grandfather, as a proud Mexicano, said he'd never marry again, and didn't, and raised the kids on his own.
Right.
And again, abject poverty, although they were campesinos. They went out and picked the fields and things like that to survive, but they'd winter in East Denver, right? And but Corky, well, his half brother, Uncle Tom, who was a bootlegger in the 20s.
Okay.
And his nickname was Uki, Uncle Uki. I don't know what that is.
The majority of our Latinos' nicknames don't have explanation. I have one.
Uncle
We
Fred.
all have one, and then we don't know.
My Uncle Fred was Kino, the oldest, born in 1921.
Yep.
Uncle Al was his middle name was my grandfather's brother, my great uncle, was Severino. So he was Seve.
Yeah.
All right. And then my uncle Arturo, my uncle Art, who was my Nino, him and his wife, my Aunt Rosalie, he was Tato. But Corky, in 1933-34, Dad's around 6-7 years old.
Okay.
Apparently a really precocious, prodigious kid who was always getting his dad was always rapping him on the knuckles or head, because this kid was always just everywhere. And at that time in the 30s, the soda pops had corks on them.
Oh, that's right.
And so if you shook them up really good, they popped the cork.
Yep.
And so my Uncle Tom made the comment to his stepdad and the brothers and saying, man, this kid, he's, this Rudy, this kid is always popping off like a cork.
Oh, that's
He's always popping off like a cork.
Yep.
So they stuck with him. Corky. Let's name him Corky. Let's give him that. Yeah.
Did he hold it during his boxing career? Or what was the other nickname you told me that?
In Mexico, they knew him as El Gato Gonzalez.
El Gato Gonzalez.
But it was Rudy Corky Gonzalez.
Right.
Corky was that was
official
it.
name. That's
he signed autographs forever as Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez. It was it, and it was Corky rather than Rodolfo.
Tell me a little bit about Rudy. His, like we were saying, his there's this mystique, and there's obviously it's known of his boxing past and how good of a boxer he was. But we were mentioning that we have a hard time finding his fights, and you were mentioning to me that you were lucky enough to stumble upon some of his footage of one of his boxing fights. Tell me about that.
Well, I stumbled, I had a researcher who's doing research on him for a book.
Yeah.
Text me, or was it email? I forget. But in 2014, I found a print of one of your father's fights. And I said, what do you mean a print? A film.
Yeah.
It was a fight he had in New York.
Wow.
And I said, oh my God, I knew what he's talking about, because my dad had his first published short story called Miracle on TV in the Catholic Register at that time.
Way.
Yeah. My dad was amazing. He was already a lover of literature.
Yeah.
He had been, that love came from a literature professor. He took a year of classes at University of Denver, but couldn't afford it. And, he went into fighting as a profession to make a living.
Yeah.
But it gave him a love of literature.
Yeah.
And he actually read in the dressing room to inspire himself to get ready for battle.
That was his pre-fight warm-up.
Some of the literature he read, some of it was poetry by Federico Garcia Lorca, or The Charge of the Light Brigade. Don't ask, right? Do or die.
So a lot of fighters nowadays, you see him with the headphones on or music.
No, he read.
And your dad was reading.
He was reading
before fights.
Before his fights in the dressing room.
Wow.
Yeah, he was a very literate man. I remember growing up. I mean, you turned around 4 or 5 years old. You took your place at his feet every night as he read from Lorca, Neruda, Borges, Marquez, from Steinbeck, from Hemingway, from London.
Wow.
These incredible authors and poets. And you read for an hour to us.
I love that.
And then he made us we never got the full 3-month vacation. We always had to take a 6-week reading course.
On top of that.
That in the summer.
Yeah.
That started at the end of June.
It helped.
And then my undergrad was English Lit and Writing.
There you go.
And
there you
so,
go.
And I changed my major about 42 times. So, until I said, I love this stuff,
Yeah.
And, but he, he went by Corky.
By Corky.
And the fighting, he grew up in abject poverty. He grew up in the Great Depression. And when he became famous, and he was Denver's #1 athletic drawing card in 49, 50, 51. Boxing was one of the king of sports, like horse racing, baseball, and boxing.
Right.
And so this guy calls me, and I go over there, and I run up to UCLA. I'm out in San Diego at Chicano Park, right?
Yeah.
And I run up to UCLA, and they put the film on for me, and oh my God, it was my father, 24 years old, the flower of his youth. And the thing is he, threw me in the ring when I was about 8, 9 years old, and he said, and I asked him, well, what weight am I? He fought a professional as a featherweight. He won his national amateur champion as a bantamweight. So peso gallo, peso pluma, and not the peso pluma we're thinking. But he, and he threw me in the ring, and I said, well, what weight am I? He goes, you're featherweight. I said, what's that? He goes, your fart weight. All right, yeah.
What was that like?
You're not big enough to have a weight,
right? What was that like for you, Rudy? I mean, I think I'm assuming you had never actually seen a full fight of your dad till that moment.
I never saw him in action.
What was that like sitting in that room and then just the film rolling and seeing your dad, like you said, in his heyday?
Oh my God, the flower of his youth.
Yeah.
And knowing, because he had taught me and coached me for so many years about what he was doing in each of those rounds and how he was fighting this guy, his opponent, and knowing what he was doing. Oh my God, that's a rocking chair. Oh, that's the parry. Oh, that's the
So you looked at it from an athlete's point of view.
Well,
in a sense,
I knew that. I looked at it like that, but I also just looked at it where I found myself just in weeping through the fight, and at the end crying with tears rolling down my face, saying, "Oh my God, I finally got to see my father." And what people would tell me. I used to run into, and my sisters too, that there'd be old guys in their, and still, if they're still alive, there's some in their 90s who come up and say, "Man," he goes, "this city would shut down when your father fought." They would hang the sign saying, "Business closed, went to Corky's fight." Yeah. He initiated a lot of the sporting venues. He fought at Mammoth Gardens, which is now a concert venue. There on Clarkson and Colfax. He one of the first sporting sporting event was at Bear Stadium was his fight with Eddie Bergen, a top 10 ranked guy. He fought at the Coliseum. He and then he had the first sports bar, arguably the first sports bar in Denver, Corky's Corner on 38th and Walnut.
Really?
That he opened in 1951, I think.
How was that?
He was still fighting.
Yeah.
He said he had to close it because his brother Al started he hired him as the bouncer, but he was the one who started all the fights. They came up in the tough east side, these Gonzales brothers, and Dad said, he always said, I had more fights in the street than I ever did in the ring.
And he had quite a bit in the ring.
Fearless. Yes, he had 75 pro fights, 52 amateur fights, and the countless times of sparring
and all of this before the age of what, 25 you said?
By the age of 25. So 16 to 25, 9 years he had all of that.
So he was fighting multiple times a month professionally. Besides,
he was doing 2 10-round main events a month.
Wow.
And he was in such he always said, I was in such great condition. He had it all, right? He didn't have the punch. I mean, he had 11 knockouts at a 75 pro fight. So he was a technical, he was a wizard. It was a sweet science. You didn't snicker because he knew how to fight. A reporter asked him one time, well, Corky, does making the sign of the cross help you? Because, he was a staunch, very strong Catholic at that time, a young man, even on his cape that he made out of my mom's wedding dress, and still is at the archives at Denver Public Library.
Your mom? Wait.
My mom's
We're not going to stop
dress,
that.
He made his fight cape.
That was his fight cape.
Yeah.
I did not know
his
that.
wife's wedding dress. They got married in 1949, Geraldine. And he made it out of her wedding dress. She helped him make it. And he had the cutout shield, and he had the old English G, the Thunderbolts, because he graduated from Manual High School.
Yeah.
Manual, it was vocational tech at 16 then, so he was a Thunderbolt.
Yeah.
And then the cross in the middle for his Catholicism, right? He was a Catholic. But getting back, the
reporter.
Dad had a hell of a wit. He goes, that reporter says, making the sign of the cross before the bell, and the first round, does that help you? He goes, only if you know how to fight.
Other than
If you don't, ain't nothing gonna help you.
Ain't nothing gonna help you. Not a cross, not anything.
Ain't God and nowhere can help you.
But,
But he was that fight. He won the 10-round main event. It was against Gene Smith, a 21-year-old African American out of D.C. who was knocking everybody out and was 34-1, 33 like knockouts.
Wow.
Who stopped my father the year before. He was one of my father's 9 losses and TKO'd him in 3 rounds.
Wow.
And so the Brooklyn Event Center was called the House of Revenge, and he won that night. 10-rounder. Yeah.
So you got to see your dad's victory on
Oh,
film.
yeah.
It was a victory.
I have it on DVD.
Yeah.
So and then it took me 2 years fighting with Fox Television that owned the rights to it to get it released to the family.
Right.
And then even before that, the Chicano Studies at UCLA footed the bill, I think $10,000 to digitize it.
Jeez.
And so I got the 3 DVDs, and I gave one to my mom. I kept one, and I put one at the archives. The archives are with Denver Public Library, genealogy and Western history. Those are where his archives are. So there's one DVD there.
We're gonna make sure to get some of that footage from you. We got to get some of these great highlights from your dad.
But that's just, how many lives did this man have?
We were talking about that because that, I think his upbringing and what I heard your dad's story, obviously Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta,
Sure.
They were referred to, and it was said so beautifully, they were referred to as the heart of the Chicano movement, but your dad was the fist.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, the fist of the Chicano movement. And I think a lot of that was because era muy aguerrido. Like he knew how to defend himself.
Yeah.
And that was part of his message. It was like, hey, we can't stay laying down. We got to stand up and fight and defend ourselves.
We have a right, a constitutional right to defend ourselves.
Exactly.
In this society, in this country.
And I think people back then, we were so oppressed, right? We were just told to sit down and shut up and the yes sir, yes ma'am, and very much treated as second-class citizens. So the beauty of your
my dad called us we became Mexican-American overnight in 1848, and February 2nd, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, another one of the hundreds of treaties this country never honored. And so at that point, my dad he called it, we're orphans of Mexico and stepchildren of the United States. Right?
And it's funny because I think for a lot of people, to this day, I still see it, and I'm sure maybe you did or didn't. Struggled with that self-identity of like, a lot of people see this and they're like, what am I? I mean, no soy de aquí, no soy de allá. I speak this language, I don't speak this language, and it's, I think your dad with the poem, I Am Joaquin summed it up so beautifully.
Dad was an anthropologist.
It was just amazing. It was amazing because his words to this day resonate with me, with so many other people, and it's so complex. That's why I just mentioned to you, we're superheroes because we can do so many things, and we are so many things, and we're not just one thing, right?
Well, as someone who studied and degreed in English literature and writing, somebody who studied the classics, but also did a lot of who went to a school called Escuela Tlatelolco, a school my father founded in October of 1970 as a middle schooler. Some of my required reading included Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Pedagogy of Liberation.
I love that.
Occupy America, North from Mexico. I mean, these were 100 years of solitude. I'm in middle school and I had to read
13-year-olds. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think to briefly touch on that, the importance of that school that's no longer around.
No, it closed its doors in June of 2017.
And its impact and the importance it had of teaching our youth of this self-pride and the literature you guys were teaching. Speak to me about the importance of that building, of that school.
I mean, for me,
in Denver,
as a graduate of Escuela Tlatelolco, you know, at the time it was housed at the Crusade for Justice and on 16th and Downey, and my father is a founder with other parents. My mother and my Aunt Teresa were administrators of the elementary school, but I was in, you know, I did my middle school and high school there at Escuela. To have teachers that look like you, that represent you, that come from your communities, and maybe they're not degreed, but they had the corazon, the heart. And it's not all, some of them were. I mean, Dr. Luis Torres, I remember, was my English teacher. I mean, he's retired. He was the vice president of Metro State College, right? When he retired and stuff. I mean, Dr. Antonio Esquivel, who edited my father's book, Message to Aslan, was one of our teachers, right? But then there were others that were just vatos, man, that came in to teach,
the knowledge, the street knowledge, the lived experience that some of these professors have are go far beyond, because again, even when we say studied or went to school, a lot of the study and the knowledge that we did obtain at these schools is white and watered down history anyway. So but a lot of these professors held some life experience, which is way more important, and representation, and sounded like us, looked like. This is how I connect that to Servicios de la Raza. Of 117 staff, 98% are Latina, from multiple countries in South America, in Central America, and Mexico. And then Chicano founded, still Chicano led. And, you know, I mean, we have the top re-entry program for people coming out of prison. We're the top out of 24 statewide programs, community program. Out of 5,000 we've served since 2015 of people coming, I mean, 18 to 70 coming out of the prisons and getting them back into community. Love that.
Successfully. We had a recidivism rate, which means, you know, recidivism means when you come out of prison, you go back, of less than 4%.
I love that.
Are you kidding?
And that
a good rate in government is 45%.
When we've been told historically through media, through a lot of things, that we're 95% going back. We're likely to go back, and it's true. It's set up that way. So
a good year is 45. Exactly. A bad year is 75.
Exactly. So the importance
used to call it the revolving door.
It is a revolving door.
Because we were doing life on the installment plan.
It is set up that way.
The beauty, you know, coming through that school, and what it does is it reinforces your self-esteem, your self-confidence, your initiative. It taught us, and I was, you know, presenting the workshop Saturday to a bunch of Latino, little Chicano, Mexicano, Latino, Hispano, whatever we call ourselves. We're the same people.
Exactly. And
telling them, if you don't know your history, you can't understand your present, and you can't envision your future. And his dad was a literary anthropologist when he wrote Yo Soy Joaquin. And I tell everybody, Google him. There's 200 pages.
Right.
Plus Google, I spent 3 days with when I
saw the shorts, the doodle.
Google. And you saw the doodle. It was the Peruvian American from New York who talked about the fact
she was incredible.
Identity. There was a man who decades before me, wondering who I was, finding out about who he was and what his identity was. Amazing.
She said it incredibly.
Vizcarro.
Yeah.
I think Vizcarro.
She said it. She's like, I think we could. She's like, I never met him. She's like, I actually didn't even know about him. So I did my research, and she's like, it resonated with me because we are looking for that self-identity. So for her, it just sparked that. One thing, and one of the great quotes I read about your dad in an interview, he said when they asked him why he wrote it, he said, I wanted to say something historical about ourselves, something about our present, and something about our future.
Right.
And I think that it really speaks on that, because the poem as a whole, I Am Joaquin, goes into our past, our present, our present back then in the 50s,
and
60s.
He called the poem the sharp knife of conscience.
Oh, yeah.
And that there are no revolutions without poets.
Nope.
That was a revolutionary.
He really was. He really was.
In so many ways.
But
he was a humanitarian, and that poem proves it.
Yeah.
And as a English teacher and someone qualified to really what are those elements and what are those defining elements of a classic, of a timeless piece of literature.
Yeah.
William Joaquin has it all.
It has it all.
You can see yourself. It is still, it is universal in theme, number one. Number two, it's relevant in so many different areas
Especially
and
now.
stanzas to today. And relevant. It's relevant.
Today. I
Just
think
like the Iliad, just like the Odyssey by Homer. That's Shakespeare, these incredible pieces of literature that have come down and live on. I mean, it does.
It really does, and I know you're not just saying that. You're not being biased, because I say that. I believe when you say that. Like it's incredible, because I have friends that aren't from Mexican descent, that aren't from Chicano descent, from walks of Colombia, Venezuela, and they're like, it resonates with all of us, because I think as migrants or people that of color living in the system, there's all these pieces that we can identify with, if not all of it. So
scorned attitudes, suppressed by manipulations. I mean, just the fierce heat of racial hatred. Right?
Do you think that love for his elegance when it came to speaking, he was so well versed, did that come from all that extensive reading from that mentor he had?
He was a voracious reader. His library, when I was growing up, had all the great world literary works. He purchased one of those libraries, encyclopedias. There was nothing. We always had reading material in the house, right?
I love that.
And then we all became voracious readers. Mm-hmm. All of us, all of the kids kind of know how to read. Some don't read as much as others, now in their old age and our elder. I just read, I get up at 4 every morning and I go through first all the periodicals. So Washington Post, LA Times, New York Times, Denver Post. I go through them all.
Really?
And read. And then I hit all the online news sources and read those things that I need to know, that I want to continue to stay relevant and aware, and understand that if I have any position of influence or credibility, that I can convey messages and messaging, and in terms of what justice, equity, and change looks like, and how it connects to our struggle as a Latino people, a Mexican, Chicano, Mexicano, Hispano, Espanol, whatever like my dad wrote, whatever we call ourselves, that we are still in a struggle.
Exactly.
And more so in this, we have come back to where we started. I think. And for me, Leon Uris said it best, the great novelist in Trinity. It's the past happening all over again.
And I see that especially now. I'm glad you touched on it, not to get too political with the political season, but all that stuff. But I see it.
I don't know how you can't get political.
I know, right?
Politics rule our lives.
Exactly. And now what the thing that I've been seeing, and we've talked about this amongst us Latinos and people of color, one of the things that's most disappointing for me is when I see people of color, people that look like me, that speak like me, now turning their back on the new immigrants, on the new migrants, and us
and
coming
also supporting people who hate us.
Exactly. Which is wild.
Who are actively working to continue to consolidate wealth and power away from people like us.
Exactly.
And people like them.
Yes.
And how can you do that?
How can you support that?
And it's, for me, it's people who are poorly read, people who don't have
history,
and also selfish, greedy people. Who think I'm in for me and that's it. And rather than understanding that our time on earth is short, and for me, finding my purpose was just a huge epiphany for me. And I ran away from it for a long time. I didn't want to deal with it. I had people that would ask me, come up and say, how come you're not doing what your dad does? And I says, well, how come you're not?
Right.
And then I tell them something that Zapata quoted, saying, we don't need a strong leader, we need a strong people.
We need a
So
strong
what are you
community.
doing about
Exactly.
it? And how are you engaging in the struggle for justice, equity, and change?
And it's funny because you mentioned on the people. Sometimes I do think it's sometimes what we call it is self-hate, or the self-hate, that real self-hate, or the people wealth. As far as wealth, I was reading, and it was this great term that called it the established migrant versus the unestablished migrant.
Yes, oh yes.
And then a lot of us, or a lot of migrants, or people that come from a migrant community, once they become established and they have their home, their car, they're just like, well, forget everybody else.
Everybody else.
I'm good. So forget everybody else that's now in the struggle.
I mean, and I go to Mexico a lot, and and I say I'm Chicano, and they kind of look at that as, you're pocho. That means you're pocho, which
Born
is
here.
a negative kind of term. But for me, how I teach what Chicano means is, Chicano comes from an old Toltec word of Shishanol. And Shishanol meant defender of the nation's wealth, or one of the Fertile Valley Toltecas. And it bastardized. And then in Mexican research, you will find the word Chicano as an elite fighting force for the independence for Padre Hidalgo. And again, for Zapata's armies of the South, Los Coroneles Chicanos. And then, so for me, it's just not, for me is, don't call me Hispanic, because...
not from Spain.
Yeah, I'm not from Spain, plus it's misogynistic. Where's the Hispanics?
Yeah.
And I don't like any word with panic in it. And anyway, but for me, Chicano embraces my indigenous heritage to this earth. My father quoted in 1970, right here at the state capitol, in front of 10,000 of us marching in protest and recognizing 16 de septiembre, said, we didn't cross the border crossed us. We've been here. And that history don't start in Jamestown and come west. It starts in Santa Fe and goes east.
Exactly.
And so when you think about that, right? And yet, we're not considered Native, but we are indigenous. And that's why government likes Hispanic, because it disengages us from our ownership of this hemisphere.
And that's when,
as indigenous people, Chicano also for me means one who resists, one who defies colonization.
La lucha. And it's funny because it was very much, your dad's message was a liberation movement. And it was the conocimiento and the idea of Aslan, and why should we be chased out of our motherland, our ancestral home, and just reconnecting with that, right? Just getting rid of this idea of hey, you're not supposed to be here, or hey,
that was amazing, because he didn't like something, he created something, and self-determination.
Exactly.
He didn't like the newspaper. He created El Gallo. He didn't like. They didn't want to print it. He created his own. He started his own print shop.
Right.
He started his own credit union to try to develop economic power. And he started.
Close that wall.
He had an art gallery, a bookstore. I mean, we had teams of athletes that were really good, right, in different areas, and that's Latinecos, and just amazing. I mean, he even started a flying club for us young people. And I had my pilot's license at 16. I started flying at 13.
And we need places like that. And why spaces like this are important, because we need platforms to show off empresarios, CEOs, business owners, athletes, because we are very much a part of the history of this country and part of the structure of this company, of this country.
Forever.
Because we can't, for the longest, we've been pushed out or not let in. So just like your dad did, we have to create spaces, because if they're not going to let us in, okay, well, we'll just create our own thing.
That's right.
And that's the important.
That's what Servicios represents for me.
Yeah.
And that's how I lead it and rebuilt this organization with an incredible team now. We're continuing to build, and expand, because of our needs are so diverse and plentiful and myriad. And so, I mean, this is how connect the dots of our lives, right?
We have
experiences.
We have to create a network for ourselves, by us, for us,
Right.
type thing, and then we can move outwards from
Right.
there. And then that's my personal opinion. Rudy, before I let you go, because I know you're short on time, what message or what message do you have, especially right now during presidential campaigns and all this stuff? What do you recommend for people to do as far as that self-identity,
Well, I gotta say,
self-worth?
que viva Mexico, because Mexico is the first democratic country
Yep.
to abolish slavery decades before this country
Exactly.
did. It's a harbinger of good for this country politically. It was the first democratic country to have the first African president
Exactly.
in this hemisphere, Vicente
Exactly.
Guerrero.
Guerrero
in
was a
1829,
black
black Mexican.
Black
right?
Afro-Mexicano. yes,
Uh-huh.
sir.
And now we get a woman president in March.
Yeah.
Please. But I want to say, you know, we just had a conference with 600 youth Saturday at University of Colorado Denver from Yuma, Wiggins, from Alamosa, San Luis, from Pueblo, from Greeley, all Denver Metro, and our theme was La Lucha Sigue.
La lucha sigue.
It's
La
not
lucha
there.
sigue. It never stops.
It will not stop until we are a full part of this society, this country. But you know, I don't know if we want to be with the with this society in terms of the white supremacy and white privilege. What that portends, I don't. You know, I don't know if we want to be that. My dad definitely didn't want that.
I don't care to be too much of it. No. So, and I think it's important just identifying. I think there's this misconception sometimes of, hey, let's rebuild it from the inside.
Yeah.
And I think that there's too much power, there's too much money to be lost, to where I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
In my opinion. So,
and I think there's too much disease in there that I mean, the system is so strong.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of white privilege and white supremacy.
Yep.
That these systems were built to reinforce and re-engage
racism and white supremacy.
Yeah.
So I think for us, my message is always one of love and compassion. So I think
we are stronger together as people of color.
We are.
And we have to find those common grounds that we can work together.
My point exactly is, especially now with our beautiful influx of Venezuelan and Colombian communities, this is the time where we need to come together and really, instead of being divided, of being like, hey, they're the problem, you're the problem, we need to literally lend our hand and help this transition period, because that was us.
Yeah. No, the problem is that we pay more taxes than Exxon, than Mobil, than Amazon, than Walmart.
And we don't have access to these things.
Taxes.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
The income gap, the wealth gap.
The wealth gap.
And we have an oligarchy in this country.
Exactly. And I think just to finish off and to invite people, where can they go? Newcomers, people that have been here, people that are struggling with the wealth gap, with housing, what kind of services can you
Well, Servicios de la Raza is a full service organization, and we have probably the most services than any other kind of provider in the state, and we are fluent in Espanol. And if we can't find if we don't have the help immediate service that you're seeking, we are a referral also. We can get you help.
Perfect.
And the fact is, we help everyone who comes to our doors. When they asked me, what about, what are you doing with the migrants? I said, are you kidding? That's like asking my dad, Corky, did you, how'd you do in the Depression? Hell, we were so poor, we didn't even notice there was a Depression. We were always that poor.
Exactly.
We have always worked with our migrant population for 52 years. So we didn't notice no influx. We just noticed more people coming.
More people of color, our brothers
that we're going to help.
Yeah.
And we serve black, brown, white, Asian, Native American. We serve everybody who comes to our doors.
Our native brothers, exactly. Yep. Thank you, Swole. Thank you again for your time. Gracias. And if anyone needs help, we'll send them out your way.
Yeah, you please do.
Good man. Thank you.